everybody. Once again, we are live for NAMI Tennessee Mondays Home Edition. We do this every week, and we know we have a massive following of people that are super excited to see, my reddish, headphony face. But before we get started, we're going to give you a couple of really cool things to remember. One, you can ask questions. Just put them right in the comments, and we will pose them to our very cool guest who's coming up in just a second. Two, you know how you find out about these things and make sure that you don't miss them? You sign up for the email list at namitn.org. Three, share us. Show us to your friends. We want to go viral. Wouldn't it be cool if NAMI Tennessee went viral? All right. Well, enough about me. Let's bring on our very cool guest, Dr. Incorrigible. Isn't that like the coolest name of anybody we've ever had on the show? Tell us about you.
Thank you. It is great to be here. I am Dr. Sin, full name Dr. Incorrigible. I am from Nashville, Tennessee, and lived around a lot, but I'm primarily a Nashville girl through and through. And I started a punk band while I was in my PhD program. That band is called Graduates Rise, and that's kind of what I'm here to talk to you about today. But I'm also a social worker. That's what all of my fancy degrees are in. I have a master's in social work and a PhD in social work. And I decided to turn all that into a punk band.
So just to be clear, because I'm in my 40s, so I remember Dr. J, Dr. Dre, Dr. Pepper, and none of them are real doctors. But you're a social worker, right? You have a PhD in psychology. You're a professor. You're a real doctor, but I'm guessing that Incorrigible is not your real name.
Correct. I am a real doctor. I have all the student loans to prove it. And my PhD is in social work. I got that from Virginia Commonwealth University. And I do statistics, right? I do research and public policy and fancy math and statistics, a lot of it around behavior research and why people do the things that they do. And as a social worker, I'm particularly focused on promoting justice and really for vulnerable groups. And so I'm very in tune to oppressed groups, right? Vulnerable groups and what their needs are. And a lot of that is because I grew up as an oppressed and vulnerable group and lower income family, grew up in Nashville. Single mom for most of my life, and so we worked a lot. I worked a lot. She worked a lot. My sister worked a lot. We all worked a lot, and it was really hard to get ahead, right? But somehow I did, right? I got all of this fancy education, and I am a professor. It did lead to a lot of student loans, but it also led to more autonomy in my life and an ability to have a job where I feel really good about what I do. And that's one of the best things about a social work degree is that you can earn a decent living. You generally get good benefits, which is something I didn't have as a child. But I also feel really proud of the work that I do. And that I may not be making six figures, but that is worth its weight in gold.
That is awesome. And I think a lot of our viewers, they understand that. We've had a lot of social workers, a lot of PhDs, and a lot of cool, really, really cool people on this show. But none of them so far have had a punk rock band. You are the only one that has a punk rock band. Can you told me a really cool story about why, you decided to start it, because it's a passion project, right? I want to make sure that I'm not actually talking to, are you a chart topper? Have you been on the top 100?
No. They did play me on Brazilian radio the other day, and that made me very happy. I don't, right. But yeah, definitely not a chart topper at any point.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Chart topper yet.
But really, I grew up in Nashville, and Nashville, of course, is a music city. I definitely grew up dating a lot of musicians, right? My father used to play on the guitar, never a professional musician, but a composer. And so I was always around music, always loved it. And then I also was going through a lot of trauma, just being poor and all the struggles that an impoverished kid may go through. And so music really helped me. Music was my life. It was my imagination, right? But I never, ever thought about writing it or creating it myself. I was dead set on getting that PhD and becoming a social worker and doing public policy, right? Research in public policy. But in the PhD program, it was actually my very first class. It was a philosophy of science class. And my teacher gave us an assignment. And it was basically like, do art or you can write a paper, right? And so I ended up writing the paper, and she was shocked. She was like, why didn't you do the art? And I said, because art doesn't come out on a timeline, And but it was that assignment where I started writing my first record. It's called Math is Hard. And the first song was called Trash Data. And it was really about everything that I saw wrong going on with the way scientists were collecting data, specifically about human beings, right? And so it's also a song to Robert Mercer, right? And about how garbage data, right? But garbage data can really be useful when you're trying to predict and control someone's behavior. So I started writing all these poems. Then I got really bored and frustrated with my education program. And so that's when I shaved off the mohawk, right? It is both sides. And so it was midway through the second semester that I shaved off the mohawk and kept writing poems, really just to cope. I still had no inclination that I was ever going to sing these. They were just poems that might kind of sound like songs, right? Or have a hook in them. But it was really not until my final year of my PhD program when I went through the same thing that many students go through, where they're held up in some sort of bureaucratic process and they have to be a student longer than they intended on being a student. And so that happened to me. I also manage physical disabilities, and that happened or perhaps caused a flare up. And so I ended up having to quit all of my jobs, right, to protect my health. And that, on top of the extra tuition I had to pay, ended up making me homeless. Now, I was a well taken care of homeless, right? I had a lot of friends and family, lots of social capital. And so I was able to couch surf, right, and stay with different people. And one of the people I was staying with saw my music and saw these poems, right? And that is Gray Jacks, the other half of Graduates Rise. And so he saw these songs and he was like, Sid, he was like, these are magic, right? He was like, these are fire. He's like, we have to sing these. And so that he ultimately is who convinced me to start the band. And he offered to compose everything. I don't play any music. I do conceptualize the melodies where I'll kind of hum it out and the phrasing of the words, but I don't play any instruments. And so he offered to be my instrument and to compose all of these songs. And he provided me housing, right? So he was definitely a true friend during that time of crisis. And so I just went through the PhD program. I waited out the bureaucratic process. I did what I had to do. I finished my dissertation. And on the day that I defended my dissertation, I also released Math is Hard, we did go on to submit that to the Working Class Studies Association for what's called peer review. It did receive peer review, and I performed it at an academic conference in the middle of like a classroom lectern.
Right? That's awesome.
Right. And I had my mohawk all the way up, right? And yes. And so since then, I have really just kind of continued. I am a professor. I don't want to stop being a professor. I love teaching students, but I also have all of this rage, right? But it's a loving rage because I am that social worker, but I'm also so angry at many of our systems, the ways we build and create knowledge, the ways that we control people's behavior or intend to control people's behavior. And we're really at a time where we're developing as a society and hopefully growing out of some things that we've done in the past and moving into something new. And that's really what my music is about exploring these really sort of highbrow topics, but from a very lowbrow sort of way, because I did ultimately grow up in housing projects, trailers, right? We were homeless even as kids. I stayed up all night to flick roaches off of my mother's face, right? I mean, we've lived in some pretty rough environments. And so that's just where my perspective comes from, right? And I'm a punk singer, and it is so natural, and it really took that final process in the PhD program for that to really emerge.
And along those lines of singing about and writing about and performing what you know, you wrote a very cool song that caught our attention about the pandemic, about being quarantined. And one, we have to see the mohawk and it's featured in the video. Two, people want to know what you're talking about. And three, we want to make sure that you're a good musician before we stay tuned. I'm just teasing. So let's play the video. Is that all right? You brought set up the video, the name of the song, and what we're about to see.
Yes. So this is our third follow-up single after that original album, right? We've done two, and then this is our third single, and it's called Quarantine, Not Quarantined. And it is definitely a little play on words there in terms of are we quarantined or are we not, right? And I wrote the song actually back in the beginning of the pandemic, and it just took a while under COVID procedures to actually get it out. But yeah, I'm super proud of it and super happy. It's let's just play it and then we'll talk about it.
All right, are you ready? Here it goes. I have so many questions. And now listen, this is embarrassing, but the first question I have is your mask game is strong. Where did you get all of those masks? You had a mask that matched your face perfectly, as did your partner. So I know that's a little off topic, but I feel that many people are going to think those were some awesome masks.
it was a very careful curation of masks to fit the storyline. And so the basic storyline in there is we've got sort of mundane pandemic life at the beginning and the end, where we're alone, right? And we're kind of focusing on activities to keep our mental health up, right? Exercise and having pets, right? Taking care of plants, being outside, all of those sorts of things that can help you to cope with that. But in the middle, it's about our imaginations. And that's really what's happening between Gray and I, who is the other person there in the video, and that's Gray Jacks. And so it's our imaginations essentially where we're going on this journey. And the masks we curated from Etsy. Almost
Oh,
every single one of them came from Etsy shops. And so as I was some of it, the idea came first, like I was specifically looking for a mask that looked a certain way or did a certain thing. And then sometimes I just found a really cool mask and said, oh, well, let's incorporate that into the storyline, right? And so it was some degree of intention and just sort of found art. Right. And but there are some really, really cool masks in there. Those clear masks are super great, especially if you're dealing with someone that has some sort of hearing impediment, right, where they really need to see the mouth move, because there are some compromises in wearing a mask, right? Even though I do manage autoimmune conditions, and so I am on a very strict quarantine, and because I've got important things to do, and I'm not looking to die from COVID, right? And so I am lucky enough to be in a position where I can do that and stay at home. But those masks are super important when we go out. But man, they can be a pain. Right. And so that's also what the video is about and what the song is about, and trying to make them cool and stylish, right? And to really think about not just the functionality of these masks, but the history of the masks. Like there's one scene in there where we're back in where Gray has on the plague doctor mask, and I have on like a thin cheesecloth mask. And that was really hearkening back to the days before we had fabricated textiles and could create these fancy fringe masks with rhinestones all over them, right, which are gorgeous, right? But and to think about the progression of time for mask wearing and for pandemics, right? Because this isn't the first time we've been through this, but that mask, right, that little scrap of material is so important.
I thought it did a really good job of illustrating that with a little elbow grease or an Etsy shop, we can improve our circumstances, right? I know that at the beginning, masks were scary. They all looked the same. They were often paper. We all looked like dentists and surgeons. And now you can buy masks at the Disney store. And I know that my brother-in-law, now you don't know my brother-in-law. My brother-in-law is, he's a tough guy, a man's man. And he desperately wants to find a mask that makes his bottom half look like Iron Man. And I thought, we've taken something negative, something scary, something frightening that we're all in together, and we're starting to make it better, but doing the thing that we need to do, which is wearing the mask. And I really appreciated that part of your video, because like you said, rhinestones, they had the flapper dress mask. I just thought that is a real good way to make lemonade out of lemons. And the video, of course, had many other examples. I just happened to notice the mask first. What were some other examples of how we're quarantined? What is it? Quarantined, but not quarantined?
Right. And, and I'll tell you, a lot of what inspired it was what was happening in downtown Nashville, and honestly is still happening in downtown Nashville. And we just released our bars can stay open till 1 p.m., I think, as of tonight. But there was a real struggle in terms of should people be allowed to go out drinking or not? Right. And there was just this huge debate, and it was really playing out in Nashville. And this is, of course, happening at the same time that we're having these protests at Legislative Plaza around George Floyd and around Black Lives Matter and all of these other issues, right? And so should people be allowed to protest? Should people be allowed to get drunk in the street, right? And so and do they wear masks? Who gets law enforcement around the masks, right? And so all of this is kind of going through my social worker head, and thinking about humanity and where we're at, right? And we're really developing morally into a different place than we have been in society. And that's really where Kohlberg's stages of moral development come in. And that's going to get us deep into a lecture, right? Right. In terms of how people develop morally and what our responsibility as a society is to help people develop morally. And so Kohlberg, of course, says that there's three basic stages: a pre-conventional, a conventional, and a post-conventional. In the pre-conventional, it's really about fear of punishment, and you're making moral decisions to avoid punishment, or you're making moral decisions because there's something in it for you, right? Fear or self-interest. And that second stage is more about peer pressure in terms of other people do they think you're good or bad or not, right? And then there's this piece about the law in terms of, do you respect law and order? And most people stop, right? They're lucky if they get to that point of moral development. And that's in many ways so sometimes where people just think law and order is the be all and end all of everything. But then there's this concept of justice, right? And that moves us into that post-conventional level of moral development in terms of our social contracts, right? And our agreements with each other to live and protect each other and keep each other safe, right? And we all sort of agree not to kill each other. You know, some people violate that and there's punishment, right? We agree not to steal things from each other, not to damage each other's property. You know, and there's these sorts of social contracts to pay our taxes, right? And that we get certain things in return for those taxes. And all of those social contracts are so up in the air right now, right? Over not just the mask issue and the access to health care, but also about who gets law enforcement and who doesn't, right? Who's protected, who's served, who's not served. And so all of these are so up in the air right now during a pandemic, right? And so, which is why we've ended up having so much strife. But me, my perpetually optimist social worker self, sees this as a stage of moral development, right? Like this is an opportunity for us to grow beyond some of the things that have held us back before. So that's why I tried to create this sort of optimistic song, right? That talked about the reality of what was going on and that struggle, but also just the hope, right? And masks can be cool. They can be fun, right? And they're time limited, hopefully, if we can master this, right? Which is why I end with the vaccine.
Yep.
Right. and so hopefully there is going to be a solution there. But there's a sacrifice in that too, because we are sort of, what are the risks of the vaccine, right? How scary is this? Who gets it and who doesn't get it? And who gets it first? And, you know, all of these sorts of things that can really drive people nuts, right? In terms of figuring it out. And so that's where we're at. And so a lot of it is just about giving ourselves a break, right? Even the people that we don't agree with or the people that we may think are morally wrong by not wearing a mask, we still have to recognize that we're all humans and that this is a very difficult situation. And so that's really what was motivating me going into it. And then I would try to make all of my songs happy so that people can dance to them, even though they may be talking about really tough subjects.
What's interesting to me in doing this job is I interview people who are very research based. You know, they write papers and do a lot of research. They have PhDs and MDs and it's incredible work. And I love those people because science is important and that's how we get from point A to point B and how we learn things. And I also interview people who make content or music videos, memes, podcasts, YouTube videos. And one of the things that I have noticed is that both of those people have the same goal: enlighten the public, educate people to their way of thinking, make people understand a greater concept that they believe is misunderstood or people are struggling with. My question, though, is you're the first person ever who does both. You have both. I mean, let's face it. That video, excellent video, but that is a viral type video. It's a YouTube type video. It's content as far as the world is concerned. But you have a PhD, so it means you wrote a dissertation. You teach people how to research, and you've quoted a lot of research even in this interview. How does How do those two parts of your personality, how do those warring factions come together? And what can they learn from each other? Because I've also noticed, and I promise the question is coming to an end, I've also noticed that out there, the researchers tend not to like the content creators, and the content creators tend not to like the researchers. And I think that's a shame, but it's a tale as old as time.
I
You're
tell you what,
both.
Gabe, that's my motivation, is because somebody told me that I couldn't or shouldn't. Right. And right. And so a lot of it is like, I'm going to take you all the way back to the 14th century and Occam's razor, right? William of Ockham proposed in the 14th century the law of parsimony. And at the time, the law of parsimony sought to rule out things that the gods did, right? And what it allowed us to do is to focus on things that man's hands can control, right? So the law of parsimony severed science and spirit and essentially said that what man's hands can do, right? The simplest answer is generally the truth, right? The simplest answer is the truth. That's essentially the law of parsimony or Occam's razor. And so it separated science and spirit. And at the time, oh gosh, it was so needed, right? Because religion or religious structures had become very corrupted. And we were essentially in the dark ages, right? And so by focusing on what man's hands could control in this binary world, right, then it gave us the scientific revolution, right? We came to understand microscopic particles. We came to understand cause and effect, right? Medicine, all of these sorts of things. We got cell phones, we got computers. We came to understand all of that because we focused on what man's hands can control. But that didn't necessarily mean that the other parts of humanity that man's hands can't control ceased to exist, right? And so in many ways, like, it's time for humanity to come full circle, and that perhaps we can find a way for science and spirit to coexist, right? And in doing that, we have to find a way to do that that doesn't undo all of the wonderful work that happened in the binary world. Like, I do not want to give up my cell phone or the internet or any of those things, but I also
Yes.
don't want to give up my part in the collective unconscious, right? Like, I'm also part of this collective unconsciousness, this brain world that can't necessarily be seen or felt or touched. And so I choose to use my white privilege any way I want, right? And I will use my privilege in demanding that I get to be in both worlds. And I'm not going to be purely scientific. And I'm also not going to be purely spiritual, right? I am both of those things. And that's really where we're at, right? Where we're shaking off the old binaries, right? But we need to do that in a way where we don't lose the knowledge that we gained from that binary. And so that we can become not just the binary, but more, right? It's not either or, it's both and. And that's where the millennials are taking us. That's where Gen Zs are taking us, right? That's where the future is taking us, whether we want to go or not, right? And so I'm a Gen Z, right? And so I'm the tail end of the Gen Z generation. And so in many ways, it's my job or my role to help pave the way for those millennials and those Gen Z generations to kind of take over. And I think there's going to be a healing between science and spirit. And it doesn't have to be a particular religion or a particular domination, but the spirit, the part of being human, the part that makes us love each other and to connect to each other and to care about each other, but also to hate each other, right? Because that's part of that too. But to have those strong feelings and emotions, and that's where I'm at. And so I do write really technical work, right? I build algorithms, right? I do statistics, a lot of pre and post tests, and to determine the effectiveness of an intervention in terms of whether or not we can see a numerical or a mathematical output, right? But a mathematical output means nothing if your people can't also communicate it with words. Right. And so I am a new breed of scientist, right? I am. I may not be the only one, or I may be the first one that NAMI has encountered, right? But I'm definitely not the only one. And it is a new breed of scientists that is kind of going into this digital world that we have that enables us to process numbers in ways we never process. And then trying to stay focused on justice and all of it, which is not always easy when everybody's trying to get you to sell out, right? And make money.
What kind of a response have you gotten from your colleagues, from other professors, other PhDs? How are they relating to this?
Well, when I first shaved the mohawk off, one of my professors told me, well, there goes your job future. You know, you're never going to get employed. And to which I responded, you're missing the point, because I don't want to work anywhere that can't handle this. Right. And so some people have questioned what I was doing. Most of them were older, not to be ageist, right? Because I also have had some like 60 and 70 and 80-year-old medical doctor came up to me after I performed at a conference, handed me every single dollar that was in his wallet, which just happened to be about $370, and just handed me all of his money and said, thank God you're here, you know. And that was right, you know, I mean, and that happens to me a lot at conferences. I'll get young students coming up to me and saying, oh my God, I want to be you. Right. And then I'll get older people coming up to me and saying, oh my God, you know, where were you 20 years ago? And we're so glad you're here. And so just like anything else, it's a mixed bag. Right. But I think by and large, people respect me. And mostly because I respect them. Right. And you're not generally going to find me saying mean things about others. I do call them out and hold them accountable. Right. But for the most part, I'm going to recognize everyone's humanity. And that's part of being a social worker, is that we honor the dignity and worth of every human being. And you may hear me rage about the oligarchs, right? Because I do believe that that's the fundamental problem in society right now, is wealth disparity or resource disparity, and all of the policies and norms and practices that have enabled this vast wealth disparity to occur and to perpetuate. And so when people are hungry, right, when people are homeless, they're going to steal, right? And I mean, and why would they not, right? And so that's part of that moral development too, in terms of the environment or the society that we create for people. So I don't know if that fully answered your question or not.
No, it does.
I think I got a little bit off.
No, I think that I like what you said about, like anything, some people love it, some people hate it, and not all young people love it as you would expect, and not all old people hate it as you would expect. And I know we're using young and old very stereotypically, but you know, my question was very stereotypical. My first thought was I have like my father a little bit ringing in my ear, telling me that if I got a tattoo, I'd never get a job. But now we have judges and prosecutors and very prominent doctors with full sleeves. So clearly he was wrong, but that doesn't make him a bad guy. He was looking out for his son.
And he was probably right for his generation.
Exactly.
Right. And the times are changing. And like right now, we have the Crown Act up before the legislature to be passed in Tennessee. And the Crown Act makes it against the law to discriminate against Black folks for having protective hairstyles, right? That may be dreads or wearing caps or do-rags or any of that sort of stuff. And of course, I'm here with my white privilege and my mohawk and my shaved styles, right? And of course, I have suffered some job stuff because of it, but those were jobs I didn't want. Some Black folks don't always have that luxury, right, or that ability, right? I also am academically gifted. I've always been rated as a high IQ, that sort of stuff, you know, and so I can get away with having, you know, the sort of radical hairstyle. But then there's also certain universities that would never hire me, right? And so it is what it is. Most of those universities I wouldn't necessarily want to work for, right? But it's about finding your niche and finding your people. And the world is so big, like there's never anything that is going to appeal to everyone. Everyone's going to get along with, you know. And that's sort of a healthy ego. I mean, and I kind of feel like if nobody is naysaying me, if nobody's making fun of me or saying anything negative, then I'm probably not doing anything, right? And that's part of like the gumption of being a performer, is being willing to put yourself out there, right? And these are my beliefs, and having the confidence essentially to take whatever may come. I think the biggest criticism I get is that cheesecloth mask, right? And people look at it on the surface and say, oh, the virus is going to go right through that. And how can you promote wearing that cheesecloth mask, right? And of course, that was part of an artistic scene set in the 1920s, right? When people were lucky to have a single layer cheesecloth mask, right? But of course, the video can't tell every narrative of every scene, right? And so some of it is left upon the viewer to kind of look at and think about. But just if anybody wonders, I'm not promoting that people wear a single cheesecloth mask. I'm promoting that people be thankful that we no longer live in a time where all you can get is a single layer cheesecloth mask, right? But that's what shows like this are for, is to help artists kind of clarify their points. And
let's explore that for a moment, because the video, about 3 to 4 minutes long. I mean, pretty quick, a nice beat, etc. And like you said, you're not rushing, but going through and hoping to get the message out. Do you ever have people that misunderstand? I know that it's easy to misunderstand parts, but do you ever have anybody that misunderstands the whole thing? They watch the video and they're like, she's saying the pandemic is fake and we should go to concerts. And you're like, that's not what I said at all. Do you ever get misunderstandings like that? Because people sometimes see what they want to see, and misunderstandings are very, very common.
Well, and I hope that no one would watch that and think, oh, well, she thinks masks are jokes, right? I think that everyone would watch that and see that I'm trying to promote the mask. But I do think that it's okay if people hear that song and think, well, does she want to be out in public or does she want to stay quarantined? Right. And that's okay, because you know what? The truth is I don't know. Like, I struggle with it every day about wanting to go out and be with people versus wanting to stay in and protect myself and keep myself safe. And it's about risks, right? Everything in life is about what risks are you going to take? And do you have the knowledge that you need to make a calculated decision about your risk? In terms of what are the consequences, right? How can I protect myself from this risk, right? I mean, all of that goes into it. And it's okay that people struggle with that, right? That's one of the main messages of the song that I want people to get. And sure, I want them to err on the side of collective rights, right? That's the main, if I had to pick one thing out of the whole song, it's collective rights now or bust. Right? Because if we don't start thinking about and focusing on protecting all of humanity, then all of humanity is going to wash right off the edge of the earth, right? Not that the earth is flat, right? But right. But I mean, we're putting ourselves at risk, right? By believing in conspiracy theories over fact, right? And that's fear, right? Where we're afraid of things. But there's also this problem where our government doesn't communicate with us properly. And so how much of that is fear, right? And how much of that is something that really needs to be addressed by society? And so that's really the point of the song, is to think about, are we individuals that are on our own, right? Or are we part of a collective, and where we should be thinking about everyone else as well? And so that is really the sort of chief message of the song. And it's art. I put it out there. People can think whatever they want to think, I mean, I don't really personally care about making money off of my art, although I do respect musicians that do try to make their living doing it. And so I'm not really invested into whether or not people like it.
But you are invested in the message getting out there, right? Now,
I am.
Do you ever find, and your mileage may vary, but do you ever find that somebody gets the wrong idea about something, they watch it and they're like, aha, she is saying that the Flintstones are not real. And then they approach you and they're like, you're saying the Flintstones aren't real. And you say, no, that's not what I'm saying. And then a discussion happens and everybody is a little bit better. Essentially, are you ever able to take people who completely misunderstand your message and educate them, or does it always devolve into this, fight or name calling or the social media hassle?
Right. I'll tell you what, and it may be the fact that I'm 6 foot tall and have a mohawk, but I just do not get picked on social media. I mean, I've had a couple of people make some comments, but And maybe it's because nobody's listening, right? Maybe it's because nobody cares. Maybe it's because they agree. Maybe it's because it's like this perfectly non-threatening message. Maybe it's because I'm intimidating, right? And so who really knows? I mean, I think it may be some combination of all of those, but I really have had maybe a total of 5 or 10 negative comments on social media. Like once after a live stream performance, somebody said it was horrible. And I just responded to him. I said, thank you. I agree. Right. Like, cause it wasn't a great performance of mine. And so I don't know, I guess that's the luxury of having a healthy ego, I guess. Um,
I
but
always try to remember.
nothing ever dissolves into a fight for me, like I generally, that's my moral development though,
Good.
where I'm at a stage where I'm not going to really let it devolve to that level.
I think it's important for a lot of people to understand that, what is it when you put something out for public consumption, the world has the ability to consume it however they want, because you've put it into the world. And that's the thing that helps me when I get the emails that are like, you're an idiot who talks too much. And I'm like, okay, well, that's their experience, and they're allowed to have that experience. But what I worry about when we're trying to get a message out, if I say, I believe that people with bipolar disorder should be allowed to hold down jobs, and somebody emails me and says, you're wrong, people with bipolar disorder should not be allowed to work. Okay, well, now I'm stuck, because on one hand, that's like a really like mean thing to say, right? I could just ignore it, but I now know that person is one of the people whose mind I'm trying to change. And clearly whatever I did that they saw did not change their mind. I sort of feel that I get a second chance though when they email me, and I'm saying email because we've been under quarantine for a year. But before this, people would walk up to me in public and say, I just really don't agree with that. And some people are like, thank you very much for your comments. But I sort of take the approach of like, all right, it's on. Let's debate this. Do you take that approach, or do you find it's better to let sleeping dogs lie?
I don't debate. And like, I mean, and I will debate in certain instances, but for the most part, I'm a teacher. I'm used to giving assignments, right? And then letting students do work and then bring me products, right? And so, but when it comes to the public, I don't really get into debates. I let them feel or think however they want to feel. And I may share how I feel, but I'm generally not the person to get into debates.
It's probably much better for your mental health. I will fully confess, I cannot deny that is probably a method that makes you happier.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, part of it is I do have autoimmune conditions, and I had a car wreck in 2009, and it left lesions on my spinal cord and set up basically everything I had a genetic predisposition for emerged. And so a lot of it involves my autonomic nervous system and my stress response. And so if I'm going to debate with someone, then it's going to be worth it, right? Meaning that I'm getting paid, they're getting paid, somebody's getting paid, it's on a big stage, right? I mean, there's going to be some purpose to it. But it's not that I don't value the art of debate, because that is important. Dialoguing with someone is important. But you reach a certain point where people are so dogmatic in their beliefs, right? Like mask wearing, because it's so visible, you can see out in public whether or not they're on your side, right? They've either got a mask on or they don't. And how do you deal with those people that don't have masks on? And there is no way that I would ever go and debate one. Right. And first of all, because that's a disease risk to get close enough to them to debate. Right. And but also it's just like that's just not a place for it. Right. Now, if somebody after this starts emailing me and talking about how they don't believe in masks, I don't know how much I would engage in that, or if, I mean, I hate to say it, but it would depend on how they approach me and if I thought there was some sort of hope that I could change their mind. Right. But sometimes it's just about education. It's about, are they reading things? Do they have that empathy or care for other people? And it's not like my conversation with them is going to suddenly help them to develop empathy.
Right. That makes sense.
Right.
Let's switch gears ever so slightly and talk about music and messaging. There's a question. Unfortunately, I can't pop it on the screen, but a question from the audience came up and said, "Music and messaging, is this how young people learn?" Do you feel that you reach the younger generation using music to deliver the message?
I think that messages can be delivered in multiple ways, and to kind of pigeonhole them into one particular mode of delivery would be doing a disservice to human communication. And I think, if anything, part of our education system, the problem is that we have pigeonholed learning, right? Into it must be in a lecture based classroom with a teacher, right? And these empty vessel brains that are having information poured into them. And I'm not necessarily sure that that's the case, right? I tend to follow something called dual cognitive processing. And of course, I've got a theory to cite for this, where you try to evoke an emotion in someone and then you provide them with follow-up information, right? So that they have that emotional connection to some sort of a thought or a word or an idea. And then they also need follow-up information, because the human brain can't process everything in a short amount of time. And sometimes you don't learn until 6 months after the class, right? Until you intake that information and then you may experience it in the world. Right. And some people may hear my song, right, but then not actually have it mean anything to them until someone that they love or care about gets sick from COVID. Right. And then they might think back, oh man, I should have listened to that crazy Dr. Sin. Right. Right. And she was saying something that was meaningful there. I mean, so messages process at such complex levels, right? That we have to really be intentional about what we're saying, right? And think about how, oh, well, how is this going to impact someone that doesn't believe what I believe, right? And to think about that, but you also just kind of have to be true to yourself, right? And that's really where I come down to is, what do I want people to hear or feel or think or see, And then who am I to think that I get to control how they feel or think or hear or see, right? And so I kind of balance that whole sort of like ball of nerves, right? It takes a certain amount of ego or narcissism to believe that I'm important enough to sing something that people want to hear, right? And so, you just kind of get over it, right? You have to be able to say, okay, well, here's this reality. If I am being a little narcissistic and egotistical and forceful with my thoughts and ideas, and maybe I'm saying the wrong thing, but I just have to trust my gut, right? That spirit, that brain world that I believe we're all connected to. I have to tap into that feeling and then just take a risk and go for it, right?
One of the things that I think about with music and messaging is we tend to think of these as new concepts, right? It's like, oh, she's getting the message out through music, and that's a novel concept. And then I think about the 80s and Schoolhouse Rock. Like that's how I learned how a bill becomes a law. And that was literally set to rock music. And there's nothing more boring. Listen to me. There's nothing more boring than how a bill becomes a law. But it's burned into my brain forever. And like you said, this is important information to have as a voter, as a citizen. And here it is. I've still got it. I can hum it right for you. Do you feel that some of the stuff that you're doing is just that, yeah, maybe young people do respond to music, but it's probably always been this way, and we just tend to forget when we become adults, and we're like, oh, the younger generation likes everything set to rock music, and that's never happened before in the history of time. Are you
Right.
Schoolhouse Rock is my final question.
Right. Well, I actually use Schoolhouse Rock in my policy class, and so it actually works really well. There's a newer, updated, sort of cynical version that talks about the influence of ALEC on the bill making process. And so if you Google Schoolhouse Rock, ALEC, then you can see that version as well, right? And so I present both of those to my students. But yeah, I mean, using music or mnemonics, right? That's the fancy scientific word for it, right? Or little techniques to help the human brain remember things is it's an age-old technique. There are different ways of doing that, and music is definitely, like, it moves our soul, right? It moves our heart. We create memories to it in different ways than non-musical things, right? It just stores in our brain differently, and so yes, connecting music and a message is important, because making people feel something, feel a connection to an idea, is really what changes their beliefs, right? Or changes their behavior, right, from that belief. And that's really what I mean, I really, that song, I'm wanting middle of the road mask people to say, I'm going to start wearing my mask, right? Like, she's making sense. And I will say, I have had people reach out to me and say, thank you for your message, right? I'm going to be wearing my mask, right? And, I haven't had anybody reach out and say, you're an idiot and I hate you, right? Right. A couple
Good.
people have complained about the cheesecloth mask, but that's it, right? Everybody else ultimately gets it, right? And I'm not trying to be threatening or intimidating to non-mask wearers. But it is about creating that positive association with a mask so that it's not the same emotional burden to wear, right? Because there's a certain fear, right? If I put a mask on, then I'm putting that on in many ways out of fear of spreading or contracting a virus, right? But if I can change that emotion and put it on because it's stylish, right? Or put it on because it's fun, or put it on because I love people, right? Or I love myself, then that's the same action, but a different motivator, right? And I think that's what music does, is it teaches people different motivations for their actions.
I love it. Dr. Incorrigible, I want to play the video one more time for any latecomers or for people that started in the middle. I think it's a great place to end. So don't hang up, because otherwise, we might lose the video. So just for everybody who has not seen the video yet, it was at the beginning of the episode. So if you're watching this recorded, you can just rewind. But we're live right now, so until I hit play, it's not going to happen. I'm going to play it one more time, and then we'll be right back to say goodbye. Are you ready?
Thanks, Gabe.
Here we go.
Shut down.
Dr. Incorrigible, thank you so very much for being here. Do you have any final thoughts for NAMI Tennessee?
Thank you very much, Gabe and NAMI Tennessee, for having me and for all of the work that you do all year long. I really do appreciate it. And thank you for caring about my video and for having me on. And wear your mask, right? Let's protect each other and let's get through this.
Thank you so much for being here. Listen up, everybody. If you want to find out about cool things like this that we do each and every Monday, join NAMI Tennessee's email list. Think about what you would have missed if you weren't on the list. I mean, you may have accidentally found it. You may be watching a video, but we do these live every single Monday. Go to namitn.org, sign up, and you will never miss another thing. I mean, after all, if they would have missed Doctors Incorrigible, just for real. This is the kind of thing that you will regret for the rest. Imagine all the people who missed Woodstock. Dr. Incorrigible, thank you so much. And thank you to all the NAMI Tennessee folks for everything that they do. And we will see you in a week. Wave big goodbyes.